Flight attendant kicks black girl off plane. 7 minutes later she owns the airline. Welcome to today's story, a tale of resilience, accountability, and transformation that begins in the aisles of an airplane and echoes far beyond the clouds. This is a story about a seemingly simple misunderstanding that spirals into something much larger, a confrontation of prejudice, the assertion of dignity, and the power of change. Meet Rachel Pierce, a composed and ambitious professional who boards a flight expecting nothing more than a peaceful journey. However, what begins as a routine trip quickly turns into a challenge to her identity and rights. In 5 chapters, we'll unravel how Rachel turns an act of humiliation into a catalyst for change. So, buckle up, because this is not just a story about a flight, it's about standing up for what's right. Even at 35.000 feet, Rachel Pierce walked confidently through Terminal 3 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport. She had just wrapped up a successful week-long conference and was heading home to New York City. Dressed in a fitted blazer and tailored trousers, Rachel carried an air of professionalism that turned heads. But she paid little attention. She had a first-class ticket in her pocket and a client proposal to refine during the flight. Her focus was sharp. As she approached the gate, a cheerful gate agent scanned her ticket and smiled warmly. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Pierce." Rachel returned the smile and proceeded down the jet bridge. Once aboard, she felt the familiar hum of the aircraft under her feet. Glancing at her ticket, she found her seat in the first-class cabin, placed her sleek leather carry-on in the overhead compartment, and settled in. She pulled out her tablet, ready to make edits to her presentation. The buzz of boarding passengers faded into the background as she lost herself in her work. The first-class section was calm and orderly, until the arrival of Olivia Grant, the lead flight attendant. Olivia, a seasoned professional with decades of experience, prided herself on maintaining order and efficiency. She scanned the cabin, her sharp eyes landing on Rachel. Something about her seemed to draw Olivia's attention, though Rachel was engrossed in her work and completely unaware of the scrutiny. Moments later, Olivia approached Rachel with a forced smile. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Rachel looked up, slightly puzzled but cooperative. "Of course," she replied, handing over the pass. Olivia studied it for a moment, her frown barely concealed. "This is for first class." "Yes, it is," Rachel said firmly, her voice calm but assertive. Olivia hesitated, then handed the pass back with a tight-lipped smile. "Thank you," she said curtly before walking away. Rachel felt a twinge of discomfort but shook it off, returning her focus to her tablet. Unbeknownst to her, Olivia was whispering to another flight attendant at the galley, casting furtive glances in Rachel's direction. After a few minutes, Olivia returned, her demeanor now more commanding. "Ms. Pierce, I'm afraid there's been a mistake. I'll need you to move to a different seat in the main cabin." Rachel blinked, her brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, but there's no mistake. This is my assigned seat. And my ticket is valid." Olivia's tone hardened. "I'll need you to comply. If not, I may have to involve security." The calm, professional exterior Rachel had maintained began to crack slightly, revealing a flicker of disbelief. Still, she kept her composure. "May I ask what the issue is? I paid for this seat, and my boarding pass was scanned and approved." "I don't have time to explain," Olivia replied sharply. "Please gather your belongings." All eyes in the first-class cabin turned toward Rachel as whispers filled the air. The humiliation was palpable, but Rachel stood tall, gathered her things, and walked to the economy section. her confidence unwavering despite the sting of the encounter. When she reached her new seat, sandwiched in a cramped middle row, Rachel pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen as she typed a message. Then, she made a call, her voice calm but firm. "It's me. There's been an incident, and I need it addressed immediately. Yes, I'm still on the flight. Just watch for my signal." Sliding her phone back into her bag, Rachel leaned back, her face serene but her mind racing. She wasn't someone who let such slights go unanswered. Whatever Olivia Grant had set in motion, Rachel was already 3 steps ahead. The hum of the engines filled the economy cabin as Rachel Pierce sat quietly in her middle row seat. Passengers around her cast curious glances, murmuring among themselves, though her outward expression remained composed. Rachel's thoughts churned with strategy. She glanced at her phone, watching as it buzzed quietly with a reply to her earlier message. "Understood. Monitoring the situation. Let us know when to escalate." Rachel allowed herself a faint smile before slipping the phone into her bag. She knew this wasn't the end of the incident, it was merely the beginning. Back in the first-class cabin, Olivia Grant moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, a small smirk tugging at her lips. To her, the situation had been resolved. She believed she had exercised her authority appropriately, ensuring the sanctity of the first-class cabin. But as the minutes ticked by, a nagging doubt began to creep in. Olivia couldn't shake the image of Rachel's calm, confident demeanor as she left her seat. It wasn't the reaction Olivia had anticipated. Meanwhile, in the economy section, Rachel's phone buzzed again. She glanced down to see another message. This one brief but reassuring: "The board has been informed." Rachel leaned back, crossing her legs and pulling out a small notebook. With deliberate care, she began jotting down notes, her handwriting precise and deliberate. It wasn't anger fueling her actions, it was something much more effective: resolve. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man leaned over slightly. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice laced with curiosity. "I couldn't help but notice what happened earlier. Are you okay?" Rachel glanced at him, her expression neutral but polite. "I'm fine, thank you. It was just a mix-up." The man tilted his head, clearly unconvinced but respectful enough not to press further. Rachel returned her attention to her notebook, every stroke of her pen a quiet act of defiance. At the front of the plane, Olivia continued her routine, though her movements were becoming more rigid. She was mid-conversation with Dennis, the senior flight attendant, when the intercom buzzed. The voice of Captain Harris, a steady and authoritative presence, crackled through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for flying with us today. We are cruising at an altitude of 35,000 feet and expect smooth skies for the duration of the flight. Please let our crew know if there's anything you need." As the announcement ended, Olivia glanced toward the economy cabin, her eyes landing on Rachel's seat. Despite her earlier confidence, unease began to creep in. It wasn't just Rachel's calmness, it was the way she carried herself. The way she had handled the entire situation with dignity and precision. Olivia felt an inexplicable sense of foreboding, as though the passenger she had dismissed so easily was about to turn the tables. Rachel, however, remained unfazed. When Clara, a junior flight attendant assigned to the economy cabin, approached her with a cup of water, her demeanor softened. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Clara asked gently, her concern genuine. Rachel looked up, offering a warm smile. "I'm fine, Clara. Thank you for asking." Clara hesitated, sensing there was more to the story. But Rachel's composed tone discouraged further questions. Let me know if there's anything else you need, Clara said, placing the water on Rachel's tray table before stepping away. The exchange didn't go unnoticed. Olivia, standing near the galley, watched the interaction from afar. Her jaw tightened, and a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She turned to Dennis, lowering her voice. "Did you see her earlier?" Olivia asked, gesturing subtly toward Rachel's row. "She had a first-class ticket. But something didn't sit right with me. I had to move her." Dennis frowned, leaning against the counter. "What do you mean, didn't sit right? Did she do something wrong?" "No," Olivia admitted reluctantly. "It was just a feeling. She looked out of place." Dennis straightened, his expression hardening. "A feeling isn't a reason to bump someone. Olivia, if her ticket was valid, you overstepped." Olivia opened her mouth to respond but was interrupted by the buzz of the in-flight phone. Dennis picked it up, his neutral expression shifting to one of mild concern as he listened. After a brief pause, he handed the phone to Olivia. "It's for you," he said, his tone unreadable. "They're asking for you by name." Olivia hesitated before taking the receiver. "This is Olivia Grant," she said cautiously. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "This is the airline's executive office. We've received a direct complaint regarding your handling of a first-class passenger. Upon landing, you'll be required to provide a detailed report. In the meantime, ensure all passengers are treated with respect, and refrain from making further seating adjustments without proper cause." The words struck Olivia like a blow. Her grip on the phone tightened, and her face paled. "Understood," she managed to say before hanging up. Dennis watched her carefully, his expression a mixture of curiosity and quiet disapproval. "What's going on?" Dennis asked, his voice low. "Nothing," Olivia muttered, though her tone betrayed her unease. She glanced toward the economy cabin, her eyes finding Rachel once again. For the first time, Olivia felt a pang of regret. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had underestimated the quiet woman in seat 23B. Back in economy, Rachel closed her notebook with a decisive snap. She glanced at her phone one last time, reading the latest message. All set. Monitoring closely, Rachel allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The wheels were in motion, and Olivia Grant was about to realize just how much weight her actions carried. Whatever came next, Rachel was ready. The tension on Flight 827 was palpable. Passengers were settling into their routines, but an undercurrent of curiosity lingered as whispers about the earlier incident circulated through the cabin. Meanwhile, Rachel Pierce remained poised in her cramped economy seat, her mind racing with precision. She had learned long ago that calm, calculated action was the most powerful response to adversity. Olivia Grant, on the other hand, was unraveling. The call from the executive office replayed in her mind as she moved robotically through her duties in first class. For the first time in her career, she felt completely out of control. Every glance from a passenger felt scrutinizing, every movement judged. The thought of Rachel seated just a few rows behind her gnawed at her confidence. In the galley, Olivia approached Dennis with an uncharacteristic hesitance. "Do you think it's serious?" she asked, her voice low enough to avoid being overheard. Dennis gave her a pointed look. "If the executive office is calling mid-flight, it's serious," he replied, his tone firm. "You crossed a line, Olivia. Whatever happens now, it's out of your hands." Olivia opened her mouth to argue, but the words died in her throat. Dennis was right, and deep down, she knew it. Her actions had been fueled by bias and assumption, and now she was facing the consequences. Meanwhile, in the economy section, Clara approached Rachel again, this time with a more apologetic demeanor. "Ms. Pierce," she said softly, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "I just wanted to check if there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable." Rachel looked up, her expression warm but unreadable. "You've been very kind, Clara." "Thank you," she replied. Her tone carried a subtle note of finality that suggested she didn't need anything further, at least not from Clara. Clara nodded and stepped away, her cheeks flushing slightly. She had witnessed enough of the earlier exchange to understand that Rachel wasn't an ordinary passenger. There was something about her composure, her quiet strength, that commanded respect. As the flight progressed, Rachel remained focused. She pulled out her phone discreetly, crafting a brief message, proceeding as planned. "Expect updates upon landing." She sent it with a decisive tap and placed the phone back in her bag. Her actions were deliberate, her calm exterior masking the storm brewing beneath. At the same time, Olivia received another call, this time from the cockpit. Captain Harris's voice was steady but carried an unmistakable edge. "Ms. Grant, I've been informed of further developments regarding the passenger in economy," he said. "The executive team is monitoring the situation closely. Upon landing, you'll need to provide a full account of your actions. In the meantime, ensure there are no additional disruptions." Olivia's grip on the receiver tightened. "Understood, Captain," she replied, though her voice wavered slightly. As she hung up, Olivia leaned against the counter in the galley, her chest tightening. Every decision she had made during this flight now felt like a glaring mistake. The professional veneer she prided herself on was cracking, and she knew it. Back in economy, Rachel's quiet composure had begun to attract attention. The man seated across the aisle leaned over again, his curiosity piqued. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice low. "I don't mean to pry, but I couldn't help noticing what happened earlier. You seem unusually calm about all this." Rachel met his gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Experience has taught me that composure is more effective than confrontation," she said simply. Her tone was polite but firm, signaling that she wouldn't elaborate further. The man nodded, clearly intrigued but respectful enough not to press the matter. As he leaned back in his seat, Rachel turned her attention back to the window. The clouds stretched endlessly below, a reminder of the altitude at which this drama was unfolding. In first class, Olivia's nerves were fraying. She poured coffee for a passenger, her hands trembling slightly, causing a few drops to spill onto the tray. She cursed under her breath, quickly wiping it away. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Dennis observed her from the galley, his expression unreadable. Finally, he approached her, his voice low but firm. "You need to pull yourself together," he said. "The passengers can sense when something's off. Whatever's going on, keep it together until we land." Olivia nodded stiffly, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel Pierce wasn't done. The calm woman seated in economy seemed to be orchestrating something beyond Olivia's comprehension. And it was only a matter of time before it unfolded. The in-flight phone buzzed again, and Olivia felt her stomach drop. Dennis picked it up this time, his expression darkening as he listened. When he hung up, he turned to Olivia with a grim look. "They've requested a formal apology," Dennis said, his voice low. "You're to approach Ms. Pierce and offer one immediately." Olivia's heart sank. A public apology, the very idea was humiliating. But as she glanced toward the economy cabin, she knew she had no choice. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and Rachel was in control now. Summoning what little composure she had left, Olivia grabbed a tray with a glass of sparkling water and made her way toward Rachel's seat. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of her earlier decisions pressing down on her like an anchor. When she reached Rachel, Olivia forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Pierce," she began, her voice softer than anyone on the flight had heard before. "I'd like to personally apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part." Rachel looked up slowly, her gaze sharp but calm. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her tone measured. "That's an interesting way to frame it." Olivia swallowed hard. "If there's anything I can do to make it right, please let me know," she added, placing the glass of sparkling water on Rachel's tray table. Rachel regarded the glass for a moment before looking back at Olivia. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone neutral, "but I think the airline will be addressing this matter appropriately." The words, though spoken softly, hit Olivia like a slap. She nodded stiffly and retreated to the galley, her cheeks burning with humiliation. For the first time in her career, Olivia felt completely powerless, and she hated it. Rachel watched Olivia retreat, her expression calm but resolute. She took a sip of the sparkling water, her movements deliberate. The wheels of accountability were already in motion, and Rachel knew this was just the beginning. As Flight 827 cruised through the final leg of its journey, the tension between Rachel Pierce and Olivia Grant seemed to ripple through the cabin like an invisible current. Though most passengers had returned to their books, screens, or idle chatter, an air of quiet curiosity remained. Whispers and side glances continued, many directed toward Rachel, who sat composed and unbothered in the middle row of the economy section. Rachel had settled into a serene rhythm, her notebook closed and tucked neatly into her bag. Her phone remained off and out of sight, but her mind was a hive of activity. She knew that this wasn't just about her treatment on the flight, this was an opportunity to challenge a systemic problem and set a precedent. She glanced out the window, the endless expanse of clouds reflecting the clarity of her purpose. Back in the galley, Olivia Grant leaned against the counter, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her usual confidence had completely eroded. She had performed hundreds of flights over her career, but this was the first time she felt her authority slipping through her fingers. The forced apology to Rachel had been humiliating, and the impending consequences weighed heavily on her mind. Dennis approached her with a clipboard in hand, his expression serious. "Olivia," he said, his voice low, "the captain just got another call from the executive office. You're to provide a report immediately after we land." Olivia stiffened. "What kind of report?" Dennis raised an eyebrow. "A full account of your actions. They've received a formal complaint from Ms. Pierce, and it's been escalated to the highest levels." Olivia's face paled. "Escalated? How high?" Dennis hesitated, then sighed. "She's connected to the board. Major shareholder. If the rumors are true." The words hit Olivia like a punch to the gut. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Rachel wasn't just a well-dressed passenger in seat 23B. She was someone with influence, someone Olivia had completely underestimated. Back in the economy cabin, Rachel's phone buzzed quietly against her bag. She glanced around to ensure no one was watching, then retrieved it discreetly. A message appeared on the screen: "Board is reviewing. Full statement expected upon arrival. Press inquiries anticipated." Rachel read the message carefully, her expression unreadable. She tucked the phone back into her bag and leaned back in her seat, her fingers resting lightly on the armrest. She wasn't someone who enjoyed attention, but she understood its power. This wasn't just about her, it was about creating a ripple effect that could bring lasting change. At the front of the plane, Captain Harris emerged briefly from the cockpit to address Olivia. His calm, authoritative demeanor carried an undertone of urgency. Ms. Grant, I've been informed that Ms. Pierce's complaint has reached the board directly, he said, his voice low but firm. They've requested that she be given full priority service for the remainder of the flight. Olivia's stomach churned. Priority service, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The captain nodded. Ensure she's comfortable and treated with respect. When we land, you'll need to provide a detailed report. No excuses. No omissions. Olivia nodded stiffly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the galley counter. Her mind raced as she considered what awaited her upon landing. She knew this wasn't going to end well. Dennis, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped closer. You should start preparing your report now, he advised. The airline isn't going to take this lightly. I don't need advice, Olivia snapped, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Dennis raised an eyebrow but didn't reply. Instead, he turned his attention to the tasks at hand, leaving Olivia to wrestle with her thoughts. In the economy section, Rachel remained calm, her composure unshaken despite the storm brewing around her. Clara returned to her row, this time with a more formal air. Ms. Pierce, she said softly, the captain has instructed us to ensure your comfort for the remainder of the flight. Is there anything you need? Rachel looked up, her gaze soft but discerning. No, thank you, Clara. You've been very kind. Clara hesitated, as though she wanted to say more, but eventually nodded and stepped away. Rachel returned her focus to the window, her mind already planning the next steps after landing. The landing announcement came shortly thereafter, prompting passengers to buckle their seatbelts and prepare for descent. Olivia moved through the first-class cabin with robotic efficiency, avoiding eye contact with the passengers who had witnessed the earlier incident. Her nerves were frayed, but she knew she had to maintain her professionalism, even as her confidence crumbled. Rachel, however, remained a picture of calm. As the plane descended, she closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath to steady herself. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability and justice. She had already set the wheels in motion, and now it was a matter of seeing it through. When the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. Passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark. Rachel, however, remained seated, allowing the crowd to thin before standing gracefully and retrieving her bag. As she walked toward the exit, Olivia stood stiffly near the door, forcing a brittle smile as she thanked each passenger for flying. When Rachel approached, their eyes met briefly. Olivia opened her mouth as though to speak but thought better of it. Rachel paused, her expression neutral but firm. I'm sure the airline will address this appropriately, she said quietly, her tone leaving no room for debate. Olivia's forced smile faltered, and she nodded stiffly as Rachel stepped off the plane. Once inside the terminal, Rachel's phone buzzed again. She read the incoming message. Security notified. Statement confirmed. Awaiting your instructions. She typed a quick reply before slipping the phone into her pocket. Her steps were steady and purposeful as she moved toward baggage claim, her calm demeanor betraying the magnitude of what had just unfolded. At the gate, Olivia watched helplessly as two uniformed security officers approached the plane. They spoke briefly with Captain Harris before stepping aboard, their presence commanding immediate attention. They headed straight for Olivia. Ms. Grant, one officer said, his tone professional but firm. We need you to come with us. There's an ongoing investigation into the incident with a first-class passenger. Olivia's face turned ashen as the weight of her actions came crashing down. She followed the officers in stunned silence, leaving the remaining crew and passengers to exchange uneasy glances. As Rachel exited the terminal and stepped into a waiting car, she allowed herself a small smile. The battle wasn't over, but she had set a powerful precedent. What had started as a single act of prejudice was now a catalyst for accountability and change. The cool air of the New York City evening greeted Rachel Pierce as she stepped out of the car in front of her apartment building. Her posture was calm, her expression unreadable, but she carried with her the weight of the day's events, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done the right thing. For Rachel, this was never about personal revenge. It was about setting a precedent that no one should face discrimination, regardless of their appearance or background. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Olivia Grant sat in a sterile conference room with 2 security officers and a member of the airline's human resources team. The room was cold and unwelcoming, its emptiness amplifying the tension that hung in the air. Ms. Grant, the HR officer began, her voice neutral but firm. We're here to gather a full account of today's incident. You've been accused of discriminatory behavior and unprofessional conduct, specifically against a first-class passenger, Ms. Rachel Pierce. This matter has been escalated to the airline's board of directors and is being closely monitored. Olivia swallowed hard, her throat dry. It wasn't intentional, she said, her voice trembling. I was just trying to do my job. The HR officer raised an eyebrow. Moving a passenger with a valid first-class ticket to the economy section without cause is not part of your job. Your actions have violated several company policies, including our zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Olivia opened her mouth to defend herself but stopped, realizing that no excuse would justify her actions. The weight of her assumptions, her bias, and her poor judgment pressed down on her like a lead weight. She remained silent, her gaze fixed on the table. Across the city, Rachel sat in her living room, her phone buzzing with messages from colleagues and friends who had heard about the incident. She scrolled through her inbox, pausing at an email from the airline's CEO, Jeffrey Daniels. Subject: formal apology and immediate actions. Dear Ms. Pierce, on behalf of the airline, I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the unacceptable treatment you experienced on Flight 827. We take this matter extremely seriously. As of this moment, Ms. Grant has been suspended from her duties, pending a formal investigation. We are also initiating a comprehensive review of our training and policies to ensure that no passenger experiences such treatment again. Your bravery and composure in addressing this matter have sparked much-needed changes within our organization. Thank you for holding us accountable. Sincerely, Jeffrey Daniels, CEO, Atlantic Skies Airlines. Rachel read the email twice, her lips curving into a small, satisfied smile. She appreciated the formal tone and acknowledgement of her efforts but knew there was still more work to be done. She typed a reply. Thank you for your message. I'm encouraged by your commitment to addressing this issue, but I would like a detailed timeline of the proposed changes and the specific actions you plan to take. I look forward to seeing these steps implemented not just within your airline but as an industry standard. Rachel Pierce. The ripple effects of the incident spread quickly. By the following morning, news outlets were already reporting on the story, framing it as a moment of reckoning for the airline industry. Articles highlighted Rachel's calm and strategic response, contrasting it with the actions of Olivia Grant. Social media buzzed with commentary, many praising Rachel's poise and determination. At Atlantic Skies headquarters, the board convened an emergency meeting to address the growing media attention. Policies were reviewed, statements were prepared, and a plan was drafted to overhaul the company's sensitivity training programs. 2 weeks later, Rachel received an invitation to meet with the airline's senior leadership team. The meeting was held in a sleek conference room overlooking Manhattan. Jeffrey Daniels himself greeted her at the door, his demeanor respectful and professional. "Ms. Pierce, thank you for joining us," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "We've made significant progress since the incident, and we'd like to share our plans with you." Rachel listened intently as the team outlined their initiatives: mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all employees, a new internal reporting system for misconduct, and an external review panel to ensure accountability. "We want this to be a turning point," Daniels said earnestly, "not just for our airline, but for the industry as a whole." Rachel nodded, her tone firm but measured. "It's a good start, but lasting change requires persistence. I'll be watching to ensure these commitments are followed through." As Rachel left the meeting, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She hadn't set out to become a symbol of accountability, but the events of Flight 827 had propelled her into a role she couldn't ignore. She resolved to use her platform to advocate for broader change, knowing that her voice could inspire others to demand better. Back in Chicago, Olivia Grant sat in her small apartment, staring at the termination notice from the airline. Her career as a flight attendant was over. She thought about Rachel Pierce, the composed passenger she had underestimated, and the consequences of her actions. For the first time, Olivia allowed herself to reflect deeply, acknowledging her biases and the harm they had caused. Though her future was uncertain, she resolved to learn from her mistakes and rebuild her life with greater awareness and accountability. Months later, Rachel boarded another Atlantic Skies flight, this time greeted warmly by the crew. The changes in their demeanor were noticeable, smiles were genuine, interactions thoughtful. As she settled into her first-class seat, she glanced at the clouds outside, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Change didn't happen overnight, but it began with a single act of courage. Rachel had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for progress. And as the plane climbed into the sky, she knew this was just the beginning. Rachel Pierce's story reminds us of the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of injustice. Her unwavering composure and determination turned a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for change, not just for herself, but for an entire industry. It's a lesson for all of us. Prejudice and bias thrive when left unchallenged. But with courage and persistence, we can demand accountability and foster progress. This tale isn't just about an airline or one passenger. It's about how individual actions can create ripples that lead to systemic change. It's a call for fairness, dignity, and mutual respect, values that transcend borders and resonate with people across the world. Whether you're in the United States, Europe, or anywhere else, if Rachel's story inspired you, there's more where that came from. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you never miss a new story. Every week, we bring you compelling tales of resilience, justice, and transformation, all for free. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay inspired, stay hopeful, and remember, change begins with you.